So at this moment in time, Albanian criminal groups are embedded at the highest levels of European organised crime, with networks spanning across the continent and the Atlantic. Over the past 7 episodes, we've looked at how the Albanian Mafia got its start during the turbulent 1990s in Albania, how it then spread its operations across the continent, and how it now plays a leading role in the trafficking of people, of marijuana and of cocaine, both across the continent and in Latin America. We've also looked at how they've been able to utilise violence and corruption to maintain their power as high-level players in European organised crime. But what comes next? In this final episode of the series, we'll take a look at just some of the future prospects for Albanian organised crime, from some of the threats and challenges that they might face to some of the opportunities they may be able to exploit. This will just be a brief overview, not an exhaustive list by any means, but we'll be going in more detail in the written report that we'll be publishing shortly after this episode is released. So let's start with a brief look at some of the ways in which law enforcement has attempted to hit back at the Albanian Mafia. So speaking in incredibly broad terms, there are, generally speaking, 2 different types of law enforcement intervention with organised crime that we come across on the platform. So the first of these is individual arrests of criminals who have potentially been caught in the act and removing individual actors from the street level. So this could be the individuals tasked with unloading cocaine from a port, it could be individual gardeners working in a marijuana plantation, or it could be a trafficker caught smuggling migrants across borders, for example. So generally speaking, these arrests remove the individual from the network without disrupting the network itself too much. So as we mentioned at the start of this series, the structure of Albanian organised crime networks is such that when an individual is removed from a network, especially at the street level, they're generally able to find a replacement fairly quickly and carry on with little interruption to their operations. So this is potentially borne out by the fact that there are more Albanian criminals in the UK and Italian prison systems than any other foreign nationality, and yet their operations within those 2 countries are still highly successful. So the other threat posed by law enforcement is the type of police operation that disrupts the entire operation of a criminal network. So because these are cross-border criminal networks, it generally requires cross-border cooperation between law enforcement authorities. So there's a couple of examples of recent successful operations targeting Albanian-speaking organised crime. Earlier in this video series we mentioned Operation Los Blancos, which targeted the company Abello. So the Los Blancos operation began in 2015 with authorities from Italy and the Netherlands setting up a joint task force with support from Eurojust and Europol. So by working closely together, the different authorities involved in the operation were able to arrest members of the criminal network across multiple different countries, which culminated in a joint action day on the 15th of September 2020. This joint strategy targeted the whole chain of the criminal network and involved authorities from 10 different countries. This included Italy, the Netherlands, Greece, Hungary, Romania, Germany, Spain, the United Kingdom, Albania and Dubai. Now in February 2022, Europol carried out a similar operation known as Operation Casino. This targeted an Albanian network that was involved in cocaine trafficking and money laundering across Europe. So separate investigations into this network began in Spain in 2018 and in Belgium in 2020, and in 2021 the authorities from Belgium and Spain set up a joint task force. This was joined by authorities from 8 different countries and culminated in a series of arrests on the 15th of February 2022 in Spain and Belgium, as well as Croatia, Germany, Italy, and the Netherlands. And this operation also targeted the money laundering operations as well as the drug trafficking, with a number of high-value targets arrested. And it involved authorities from Belgium, Croatia, Germany, Italy, Spain, the Netherlands, the United States, and the United Kingdom. Now there are several other joint operations that take place in Europe. So there are MPACT joint action days, one of which took place between the 26th and the 29th of October 2022, involving 28 different countries and the arrest of more than 380 different people involved in human trafficking across the Balkan route. And in fact, a report analysing Europol's joint operations between 2018 and 2021 found that authorities from nearly 50 countries, so 47 different countries, were involved in the joint operations targeting Albanian-speaking networks specifically. So this shows both the spread of the activity of these networks, but also the spread of the activity required to effectively combat them. Get in-depth insight on the activities of Albanian organised crime. Transnational organised crime is one of the biggest threats to security in Europe today, and the Albanian Mafia is one of the most significant organised crime groups on the continent. Using open source reporting and data from the Intelligence Fusion Threat Intelligence platform, we will be releasing a comprehensive report on the state of Albanian organised crime groups and their impact on global security. Sign up now to receive the report as soon as it's released. Click the link in the description below. So perhaps some of the most successful operations have involved the successful infiltration of encrypted communication networks. So the encrypted communication apps Encrochat and Sky ECC were both widely used by criminals across the world who openly discuss criminality on these platforms. The successful breakthrough of these channels in 2020 and in 2021 have led to hundreds of arrests across the continent, many of which involve Albanian-speaking organised crime. So the infiltration of Encrochat led to more than 100 million different encrypted messages being intercepted by police, and reportedly the infiltration of Sky ECC has led to the seizure of more than 1 billion encrypted messages, which are still being looked over by authorities. Now, on Sky ECC, apparently after English, the most common language spoken on the platform was Albanian. So Albanian-speaking networks prefer to meet face-to-face when possible, and if not possible, they use encrypted communications networks. And now, just because Encrochat and Sky ECC have been infiltrated by authorities, this doesn't mean that they've stopped using encrypted communications. Now, reportedly, an app that they use at the moment is an app called Matrix, or at least according to a report in the Albanian media. And furthermore, it's in general quite difficult to infiltrate these groups because of their tight-knit nature and the fact that they rely on blood or social ties. And those who are arrested adhere to a strict code of silence, according to the National Crime Agency, with the family members in Albania being taken care of by Albanian members of the Albanian network, and then resuming their criminal activities once they've been released. So that's law enforcement outside of Albania. And as we mentioned in the previous episode, Albania itself is seen as something of a safe haven for these criminal networks, potentially more safe home turf, where they feel more comfortable carrying out high-profile acts of violence, where they've been able to sow corruption within the police, within the judiciary, and within politics. But there are signs that Albania is taking more stringent measures to tackle this. So Albania continues to push for a deeper relationship with the EU. As part of this, it's attempting to crack down more strongly on the organised crime that's taking place in Albania and the networks that operate across borders, especially within EU countries. Now, we mentioned in the previous episode the formation of the SPAK, the Specialised Task Force set up to tackle organised crime and corruption. Over the past year, there's been a wave of arrests of Albanian criminals as part of Operation Golden Bullet, led by SPAK. This is both in Albania and across Europe as well. This has been aided by the testimony of a former contract killer by the name of Nuruddin Dumani, who was arrested in May 2022. And as part of this investigation, several mass arrest warrants have been issued, including some of the more high-profile members of organised crime based in the country, and the seizure of assets as well. So Florence Chapia, who we mentioned in the previous episode, is a high-level member of organised crime based in Albania, and part of the Chapia crime family based in Elbasan, has had buildings, land and businesses seized by authorities. And in the past month, missing gambling boss Ervis Martinaj has had assets worth more than 10 million euros seized in the country. It still remains to be seen what kind of convictions come from this operation, but is potentially a challenge to Albanian networks that have previously been able to rely on the country as a dependable home turf, if you will, from which to operate. So in recent years, we've seen some of the biggest law enforcement operations against Albanian organised crime. What kind of impact this might have on their operations remains to be seen, but if they're able to successfully disrupt some of their operations, then this may lead to further knock-on effects on Albanian-speaking organised crime. One of these knock-on effects might be the increase in conflict between these networks. So when a criminal network is disrupted, this might provide opportunities for another criminal operation to try and muscle in on their turf. And often we find when organised crime networks experience a period of disruption, it leads to an increased period of conflict between rival groups as they jockey for position. So that's some of the potential challenges facing Albanian organised crime by the authorities. But what about the future of some of their criminal trades? So we mentioned that record amounts of cocaine are being seized in Europe, but interceptions are generally not having much of an impact on their operations, as some of the key indicators, the price of cocaine and the purity levels, both suggest that the cocaine trade in Europe have not been affected too badly. Prices continue to go down and purity continues to rise. And while these seizures are potentially disruptive, they're often seen by criminals as just a cost of doing business. And because both demand in the continent and supply from Latin America are so plentiful, these seizures are not really having much of an impact on their operations. But what if the supply of cocaine was to decrease? Would this then increase pressure on these networks and maybe lead to more conflict between them? Is that even likely? At the moment, the Colombian government, led by Gustavo Petro, is pursuing total peace, so involved in peace talks with many of the criminal organizations involved in cocaine production. And in fact, coca production in Colombia, as we mentioned, is at an all-time high. And as Gustavo Petro is pursuing peace talks with many of the actors who are involved in cocaine production, including the ALN, he's further stepping back from eradication efforts, which suggests that coca production is only going to increase. It's also increasing elsewhere on the continent. So during the COVID-19 pandemic, the Peruvian government stepped back from eradication efforts in order to focus its efforts on combating the pandemic. And consequently, coca production in the country is estimated to have increased by 22%. The current political upheaval in the country may push coca eradication even further down the agenda. We're also seeing coca and cocaine being produced outside of the traditional three main countries of Colombia, Peru and Bolivia. So coca production in countries such as Honduras and Venezuela is reportedly increasing. We're also seeing additional opportunities for cocaine traffickers. So planned improvements to Latin American infrastructure and trade with Europe, while important for Latin American economies, particularly after the COVID-19 pandemic, they're also likely to provide further opportunities for cocaine traffickers to smuggle cocaine into shipments, as the efficiency and the size of ports in Latin America increases, and there is a wider range of ports from which to smuggle your cocaine into shipments.
So what we've been seeing in recent years is that cocaine production has increased. It's never been as high as it is now. It leveled a bit during the pandemic, but now it's back to like record heights. Even, the days of Pablo Escobar and all those things. There's more cocaine being produced now than ever. It's also moving to different countries, so there's some reports of it being produced in Ecuador itself now. And there's multiple reasons for this. In Colombia, one of the main reasons is they stopped using planes to drop chemicals on the coca fields. Glyphosate, I think it's called. Which was really toxic and contaminated nature and drinking water. So I guess it's good that they stopped, but one of the consequences is that cocaine production is higher than before. The pandemic didn't help because economically people are in a worse situation, so there's more incentive to grow coca and to get involved into crime. And I think, like I said before, the future of Latin America, if governments want to improve their situation, they want to invest in infrastructure, and they want to invest in the things drug traffickers can hijack. So better ports, hopefully better highways, because they want to increase trade with the rest of the world. So a lot of countries, the Mercosur countries, are negotiating a trade deal with the EU. Countries like Ecuador are negotiating a trade deal with the US. And I hope they manage to do that, because it would be good for the economy, but it would also be really good for drug traffickers.
We're also seeing a diversifying of shipping routes to Europe within the cocaine trade, especially Albanian organised crime. So for instance, a recent incident where cocaine was seized from boats off the coast of Senegal. Now, cocaine being shipped to Europe often goes via West Africa. This isn't a new route. The Ndrangheta specifically have been known to traffic cocaine through West Africa, with a reported presence in the Côte d'Ivoire, for instance. However, this particular incident was the first time we have mapped Albanian criminals specifically using this route. So while the focus of this video series has been criminality in Europe, another potential development is the cocaine pipeline to Australia, where cocaine reportedly sells at wholesale for around about $100,000 per kilogram, making it far more profitable than any other major market. We recently mapped an incident where cocaine being trafficked from Brazil by an Albanian network was going to travel via Europe and then ultimately to the port of Adelaide, reportedly connected with an Australian outlaw motorcycle gang. Generally speaking, Australia is home to a small but significant Albanian population of around about 25,000 people. There's a sizable Balkan community in general, particularly from Serbia and Croatia, while the Ndrangheta is reportedly operating in the country as part of the Italian diaspora in Australia, as well as Greek organised crime groups. Now, all of these organised crime groups are networks that Albanian groups work closely with in Europe, and therefore may have potential connections with those groups in Australia too. Now, in 2022, while the port of Rotterdam actually recorded fewer seizures of cocaine, going from 70 tons of cocaine seized in 2021 to around about 47 tons in 2022, seizures in the port of Antwerp continue to reach record levels. In 2022, more than 110 tons of cocaine were seized just in the port of Antwerp. And according to some reports, more cocaine is being seized in the port of Antwerp than can be destroyed. So there are reportedly stockpiles of cocaine sitting in empty warehouses in the port, with authorities now worried that criminals operating in Antwerp may target these warehouses for raids in order to get their cocaine back. And we could see an increased diversification of the ports being used by cocaine traffickers. So the EMC-DDA reported that criminal networks continue to attempt to circumvent controls by targeting smaller secondary EU ports, such as Vigo in Spain, Livorno in Italy, Sines in Portugal, or Vlissingen in the Netherlands, where profiling and control measures might be viewed as easier to overcome. And a total of 60 tons of cocaine was seized in such secondary EU ports in 2020. Now, in 2022, Dutch authorities reported that the port of Vlissingen seized over 4,000 tons of cocaine compared to 2,000 the year before. So the amount of cocaine seized in the port of Vlissingen has doubled in the space of a year. Increasingly, European organisations are refining cocaine into powdered cocaine in Europe itself as opposed to Latin America, and there's been an increase in seizures of chemicals used to do this. And this is something that was noted in the EU drug market report on cocaine for 2022 by the EMC-DDA. Now, these don't necessarily mean that Albanian groups themselves are involved, but this is certainly another opportunity that they would be well positioned to exploit should they choose to do so. So in terms of the cocaine market, it would appear that there are actually more rather than fewer opportunities facing Albanian organised crime. Now, in general, there are plenty of other opportunities for organised crime to exploit in Europe, not just Albanian groups, but organised crime in general. The cost of living crisis, for example, is likely to push more people into criminalities.
What's making the problem a lot worse is the economic situation in Latin America. So because people don't have opportunities, they start growing coca. They get recruited into these gangs really easily because there's nothing else to do. There's no opportunities, especially for young people. So it's really easy to kind of get involved in this stuff. Whereas Europe, I think we cannot be naive and think it's never going to be as bad as in Latin America, because it's getting worse here as well. But I think kind of the social institutions that we have and for now, like, good economic situation sort of is helping us kind of stay out of trouble in that sense. But here, that's also getting worse. Like, the cost of living crisis, I think, is going to push more people into criminality.
So the cost of living crisis in both Europe and Latin America is likely to make people more vulnerable to being exploited by criminal gangs. It might push more people into criminality, so it could be used as a recruitment opportunity, but it could also make people more vulnerable to corruption. For Albanian groups, there may be potential opportunities to expand as law enforcement cracks down on other groups operating on the continent. So the recent Maxi trial targeting the 'Ndrangheta in 2021 was the largest organised crime trial in Italy since the 1980s, with more than 300 members of the 'Ndrangheta arrested. In the Netherlands, there's the ongoing Marengo trial targeting the so-called Mafia. This may disrupt the activities of Moroccan organisations operating in the country. The high-profile killings associated with this trial, as well as the threats to the safety of public officials, will likely focus the attention of law enforcement on the activities of the Moroccan groups, and therefore potentially leaving more space for Albanian networks to operate. Albanians are also making contacts with other groups. So something that's come up in reporting on the dismantling of an 'Ndrangheta operation in Brazil featured a member of the 'Ndrangheta, Umberto Baloco, acting as a guarantor for an Albanian group with the First Capital Command in Brazil, who were unhappy with the late payment from an Albanian group for a shipment of cocaine. And within this report, Umberto Baloco is reported as saying that this group delivers our marijuana. I give you my word that you will have all of the money, all of it. So we're actually seeing their existing network of contacts actually vouch for them with other groups, and that their existing reputation that they've built up for reliability and the good relationships that they've built with other networks are now working in their favour as they continue to expand their operations. We mentioned in the previous episode that Albanian criminals were working as money launderers for Mexican cartels. Now, could this potentially lead to Albanian organised crime groups setting up operations with Mexican cartels in other areas of criminality? We know that Mexican cartels have a presence in the Netherlands, for example, in the production of methamphetamine. We know that Albanian groups have a strong presence in the Netherlands as well, and we know that there is this existing relationship between Albanian networks and Mexican cartels, so potentially it could be logical that they then expand into other areas of cooperation with the Sinaloa or CGNG cartels. In general, they're likely to continue to be high-level players in trafficking of cocaine, as we've mentioned, but also marijuana and human trafficking, while potentially expanding into other drug markets.
They are likely to move to other markets and become increasingly involved in the trafficking of a greater variety of drugs using their already established networks and routes. In Greece, for example, there has been an increased involvement of Albanian groups in the trade of ecstasy, which is produced mainly in the Netherlands and trafficked into Greece through Albania. Similar to the tactics used over the past years to establish their dominance in the heroin and cocaine trade, Albanian groups are likely to start by providing logistical support for other criminal organizations before taking over.
And then finally, back home in Albania, well, we mentioned the potential increased willingness to crack down on organised crime by the Albanian government as part of their attempts to join the EU. There are a couple of policies that have been floated by the Albanian government that might actually make it more amenable for Albanian organised crime groups. The first is the fiscal amnesty scheme. Now, under this proposal, any foreign citizen or Albanian can deposit up to €2 million into the Albanian banking system while enjoying legal immunity and a 5 to 10% tax. Now, this has been criticised in Europe as making it much easier for criminals operating on the continent to launder money in Albania. They've also floated a so-called golden passport scheme. This is a plan to offer wealthy foreigners Albanian citizenship in exchange for cash payment and investment in the Albanian economy. This is a proposal that has been criticised by the European Commission. which has said that it would present risks as it concerns security, money laundering, tax evasion, terrorism financing, corruption, and infiltration of organised crime, and would be incompatible with EU norms. So again, there are several potential opportunities for Albanian organised crime to continue to grow in strength. And it could be that the Albanian networks themselves perhaps pose the biggest threat to their continued success, in that there are ongoing gang wars between rival groups both in Albania and in neighbouring countries such as Greece. And we mentioned that high-profile violence is bad for business. But there could also be a change in some of the characteristics that define these Albanian groups as a new generation of Albanian or ethnic Albanian criminals emerges across Europe. So we've mentioned throughout the series that Albanian networks are defined as being very patient, businesslike, and a desire to operate under the radar. But for those members of the criminal operations who haven't grown up in communism or come through the secret services, the initial members of these Albanian gangs did, or those who didn't come of age during the violence of the 1990s, perhaps there may be a slightly different criminal personality associated with these criminals. So one example could be from Rome, a criminal by the name of Elvis Demche. He was the son of Albanian immigrants who reportedly attempted to take over the cocaine trade in Rome in the space of just 10 months. Now, as well as flooding the city with cocaine from Brazil, he was reportedly involved in a high-profile gang war with a rival Albanian organisation led by Ermal Arapaj. And this involved high-profile violence which attracted the attention of the police. Demche was caught through the infiltration of the Sky ECC app, and among the messages that he sent on the app were plans to assassinate police officers as well as 2 judges in Rome. This is something that hasn't been done by any criminal organisation in Rome. So carrying out a high-profile attack on a member of the judiciary in the heart of the capital city would be completely at odds with the general modus operandi of Albanian-speaking organised crime groups that we've seen over the past 30 years in their operations in Europe. In a court document from the UK as well, on the appeal against the exclusion notice of Fatih Doughty that we covered in an earlier episode, a member of the NCA who was giving evidence also suggested that there was a slight change in the attitude of Albanian criminals who are from a younger generation. So the NCA source quoted at this Home Office hearing in 2021 said that although the older generation of Albanian organised criminals had until recently been reluctant to carry out any form of violent retribution, kidnap and torture in the UK, the younger generation of Albanian criminals is starting to lose the reluctance of the older generation to do anything that would bring them to the attention of law enforcement agencies. And consequently, there are now said to be increasing numbers of murders being investigated in Albania and the wider Balkans in Northern Europe, which are being attributed to members of Albanian crime groups. For the time being, though, the current generation of Albanian organised crime groups remain defined by a few key characteristics that we've explored over the past 8 episodes. So while there are numerous possibilities for the future of Albanian organised crime, what we can say for certain, looking back at the past 8 episodes of this video series, is that the Albanian Mafia has experienced an almost unprecedented rise in such a short space of time. In the space of just over 25 years, the Albanian Mafia has grown from small local gangs fighting over territory, such as small towns in Albania, to operating complex transnational criminal networks among some of the most lucrative trades in organised crime. And they now control the trafficking of drugs worth hundreds of millions of euros every single year, as well as trafficking thousands of people across borders. Hardened by violence and turmoil in the 1990s, they've emerged as incredibly capable and business-savvy operators who, as well as trafficking marijuana and people from their home country of Albania, have managed to build relationships with groups trafficking heroin from Central Asia, migrants from the Middle East and Africa, cocaine from Latin America, and who have opened doors for them in Northern, Southern and Western Europe. And, as we covered in detail, they're now among the most significant organised crime groups operating on the continent. We hope you found this video series interesting and informative. As we've mentioned, we'll be releasing a detailed report covering everything we've mentioned in this video series in one place, which you can sign up for in the description of this video. And if you've enjoyed our content, be sure to subscribe to our channel to catch future videos. We'll be covering everything from criminality to global and regional security, risk management and geopolitical issues. Thank you very much for watching.